guys, it's Andrew from the blog Pine and Prospect Home, and today I want to talk about white paint and how to choose the perfect white for your home. So if you've been following along with me over on Instagram and my stories, you know that this past weekend we ended up painting our entire living room ceiling a bright white. I was trying to choose like a creamy off-white color for the walls, and our ceilings had never been painted. They were this creamy color when we moved into the home, and because of that it was really throwing off my decision for the walls. So we made the hard choice to just cover everything in plastic and paint these ceilings. I'm so glad we did it. I've wanted to do it for a really long time. I think that they are brighter and just so much more beautiful. These ceilings are original to our 1930s home. They are plaster ceilings. Once the ceilings were finished, that really helped me to understand what color I wanted on the walls. I was leaning towards a very bright color, maybe like a creamy off-white, and I thought that that would really showcase the new built-ins color, which I know a lot of you really loved, but there were some of you that were not very happy with that change. And truth be told, I think I'm just gonna leave it that way for the winter and just kind of live with it for a few months before I decide to change it. So I apologize to all of you who really didn't like that change, but right now I feel like it's cozy and I think I'm gonna leave them that way. Anyways, as far as the walls go, there were a lot of things that I learned in the process of choosing a white, and I want to share those tips with you today in case you're trying to find the perfect white for your space. The first thing that I would recommend when choosing white paint colors is to make sure you get samples. No matter what, I live in the middle of nowhere. The nearest Home Depot or Lowe's is an hour away from me. And I made a huge mistake and did a bunch of research on Pinterest. I looked at a lot of people's homes. I decided that white dove was the perfect color for my living room. I went and had some paint mixed. Thankfully, I only got a quart mixed at our local hardware store. Brought it home and it read very blue-green on my walls. The undertone was very green and I couldn't figure it out. And then my husband started showing me what the different tints meant in the paint. So, number one tip before I move on to my next tip, make sure you buy samples. You know, I had Halo in my living room before by Benjamin Moore, and Halo is a beautiful color. Halo looks gorgeous in my bedroom upstairs. It looks pretty in my kitchen. In my living room, it really looked like this greenish gray. I had people asking, now does it read green? Because of my living room photos. So you've got to test it in your space. You've got to know what it's going to look like in the space you're working with. You have to see it on the walls before you commit to a color. So moving on to my next tip. When you're choosing samples for your space, make sure that you choose samples that have different color tints. So what I mean by that, this is one of the samples that I ended up choosing for our home. It is actually the color I ended up going with. There's a funny story that I'll tell about this color in a moment. But if you look at the top of these samples, you can tell that there is BL, CL, and that's it. So you want to look up those tint initials and see what they stand for. What does BL stand for? What does CL stand for? The color that I originally chose for our living room, I believe it was White Dove. It had a tint in it that was a bright yellow. My husband explained that to me. He worked in hardware for 7 years, so he was very familiar with mixing paint, and he said, Andrew, that has a bright yellow tint in it. And so because of that bright yellow, for whatever reason, it was reading very green in my house. This is the color I ended up going with. Now this does have CL in it, which is a yellow oxide, I believe, but that is much more a sort of brown yellow. It's not so much a bright yellow. So I don't know if that makes sense, but do your research, look and see what tints go into the paint colors that you want to choose as samples. You know, your hardware store will print these labels off, and maybe before you have them mix it, just take a look and see what tints will be inside of the paint that you're choosing, and try to choose samples with different tints in them. So if they all look very similar, all of your samples, maybe try a color with a completely different tint in it than the others you've chosen. So once I got all of my colors on the wall, I tried Alabaster. I tried, and I can't remember, I think Alabaster was by Benjamin Moore. I tried this color, Swiss Coffee by Benjamin Moore, and then I tried a Sherwin-Williams color. I believe it was called Cloud. And I ended up really loving the Swiss Coffee. It was a very neutral white. It didn't have any weird undertones, at least in my living room. It didn't have any weird undertones. And so I just wanted it a tiny bit darker, and this is so hilarious. I went to my local hardware store, it's a True Value, and I looked at all of their white paints to try to find one that was extremely similar to this Swiss Coffee color, but maybe slightly darker. And they happened to have a color called Swiss Coffee that was just a tad bit deeper than the Swiss Coffee by Benjamin Moore. How funny is that? So the same name, Swiss Coffee, but the color I chose is Swiss Coffee by True Value paint. So anyways, I ended up loving the color. I still think I really like it. But there's one more thing you should keep in mind when you're choosing white paints, and that is that sometimes, especially on a sunny day, they will reflect on what is happening in the rest of the room. So for example, I have these beautiful floors that are original to my home, and they are very, very orange. One day I would love to refinish them, take them maybe to like a soft, lighter stain, but that's not in the budget right now, so we're living with them, and that's fine. But sometimes on a very sunny day like today, the bright orange from the floors will reflect off of that gorgeous sunlight coming in through the window and cast this like pink hue on the walls. So don't let that confuse you. It's important to live with your sample colors for a couple of days. Look at them in different lights. Really try not to assume right away that a color might not be working if it's reflecting off of something else. I have a very dark living room couch. It's a dark gray color, and part of me wonders if a color with a yellow base does not work because it's reflecting off of that couch and casting this green tone. I'm not really sure. I'm not a paint expert. This is just what I sort of learned in the process. And so those are my 3 tips. Get samples, try them in your space. I would start with 3 or 4 different samples and put them all over the room. Try them in different corners of your house. Try them in the areas that you look at most, but try them in different corners as well, and really see if you can decide on a color based on those samples. And then when you're choosing samples, make sure you choose samples that have different tints in them so you can see what tints work best in your space. And then number 3, really study those colors and make sure that you're not allowing the sunlight or different reflections to affect your decision. Maybe look at that color when the sun isn't blasting the wall. Look at that color on more of a cloudy day when you can get a true representation of it. So those are just some tips that I learned along the way. So far, I'm really loving this color. You might have noticed these little hooks. This is where I hang my baskets on my wall, and I just left them right in the wall because we have plaster walls. And if you start unscrewing things and taking nails out, it's almost impossible to put that screw back where you had it because the plaster crumbles, and yeah, anyways, it's a huge mess. I've learned that in the past. So I just left these here because I plan on putting those baskets right back up. So all of you paint experts, I'm sorry, that's just the way that I do it. Anyways, I hope these tips help you today. My living room is almost finished. I have to finish painting the built-ins, and then I'm gonna put the living room back together. I'm excited to get it all cleaned up and straightened. We've kind of been living in chaos all week with the home like this, but that's okay. Anyways, I hope these tips helped. If you're new to my channel, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Thanks guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.